You're fired. Grab your things and get out of here now before I call security. Garrett Blackwood's words echoed through the dining hall of Le Chateau d'Or like a gunshot, instantly silencing the conversations at the surrounding tables. Elena Moretti felt her legs tremble, not from fear but from pure, absolute fury burning in her veins like liquid fire. The white apron she had worn for 4 years was ripped from her waist with a violent tug, the fabric tearing slightly at the side, a loud, humiliating sound. 37 pairs of eyes, belonging to rich, bored clients, fixed on her with that mixture of fake pity and morbid curiosity of those watching a car crash who cannot look away. Garrett held the apron as if it were contaminated trash, his face red with performative anger, the kind of exaggerated indignation petty tyrants love to display when they finally find a victim who cannot fight back. Elena took a deep breath, smelling the scent of bechamel sauce mixed with the expensive rose perfume pumping through the wall diffusers, trying to process that her life had just crumbled in seconds because of a plate of food and an act of basic compassion. It had all started 15 minutes earlier, when an Asian man of perhaps 70 walked through the glass doors with the unmistakable hesitation of someone who knows they don't belong. His olive-green military jacket was stained with old dirt, patched at the elbows with mismatched fabric, and he limped supported by a makeshift cane that looked like a broom handle wrapped in black electrical tape. Disheveled white hair fell over a wrinkled forehead, and his hands trembled slightly as he looked around the hall, decorated with Swarovski crystal chandeliers and tables covered in Egyptian linen. Elena was serving an $800 bottle of red wine at table 6 when she saw Garrett practically running toward the entrance, his face already assuming that expression of icy disdain she knew so well. But before he got there, something in the veteran's gaze made Elena stop completely, the wine bottle still suspended in the air. Those eyes weren't those of a desperate beggar or someone looking for a handout. They were crystalline, intelligent, observant, assessing every detail of the environment with a near-military precision that contrasted brutally with the destroyed appearance of the body carrying them. Garrett planted himself in front of the man like a wall of meat and overpriced cologne. This establishment is for reservation holders only, and clearly you don't have one. I suggest you find a shelter or something of the sort. His voice dripped with poison wrapped in fake politeness, that tone arrogant managers use when they want to humiliate someone without using profanity that might offend paying customers. The veteran didn't move. He simply looked at Garrett with a disconcerting calm, and then said in a raspy but firm voice that he only wanted a glass of water, nothing more. He had been walking for hours, and his legs couldn't take it anymore. Elena saw the exact moment Garrett was about to explode, his lips tightening into a thin line, shoulders tensing, that micro-movement that always preceded his explosions of performative power. But before he could speak, Elena was already moving, her feet carrying her automatically toward the entrance, the wine bottle being deposited on the nearest table without ceremony. Something in her chest tightened, a mixture of visceral empathy and painful memory of the days when she herself had to choose between pride and hunger, between dignity and survival. "Sir, please come with me. There is a quiet table in the back where you can sit." The words left her mouth before her brain could process the consequences, and she was already guiding the veteran by the arm, feeling the tense, wiry muscles beneath the worn jacket. Garrett froze for 2 full seconds, his brain clearly failing to process that someone had justified his authority so directly and publicly. The veteran looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't completely decipher, something between genuine surprise and a kind of deep relief, mixed with something else that looked almost like recognition. She installed him at table 17, the most discreet in the restaurant, hidden behind a decorative marble column, and without asking anything went straight to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, she returned with a generous plate of grilled salmon with white asparagus risotto and truffle butter sauce, the most expensive item on the menu, costing $340. The veteran widened his eyes when he saw the food, began to protest that he couldn't pay. But Elena just smiled that tired, kind smile that had become her trademark and said that his service to the country had already paid far more than any meal would ever be worth. That was when Garrett appeared like a storm of barely contained fury, his footsteps so heavy that glasses on nearby tables trembled slightly. He saw the food, saw Elena standing there with that expression of serene defiance, and something in him simply snapped. What the hell do you think you're doing turning my restaurant into a charity kitchen? Do you know how much that dish costs? $340 that will come out of your pocket, not mine. Elena tried to explain that she would pay with the day's tips, that the man was a veteran who just needed a decent meal, that basic humanity should be worth more than absurd rules of exclusivity. But Garrett wasn't listening. He never listened, because listening would mean acknowledging that other people had value beyond serving his pathetic need for power. He grabbed her arm, his fingers squeezing hard enough to leave marks, and dragged her through the hall while announcing her termination for everyone to hear. The veteran tried to stand up, his voice shouting that this was unfair, that he didn't ask for anything, but Garrett growled for him to stay quiet or he would be thrown out too. And that was how Elena found herself on the sidewalk 3 minutes later, clutching a battered bag with a spare uniform and a crumpled photo of her daughter, watching the glass door of the restaurant close in her face, like the door of a prison from which she had just been released or condemned. She didn't know which yet. The sidewalk was cold beneath her legs when Elena finally allowed herself to sit, her back resting against the brick wall of the restaurant's side alley. Her hands shook as she opened her worn purse looking for her phone. But when her fingers found the cracked screen, she simply froze, unable to dial any number because there was no one to call. Her mother had died 3 years ago of cancer that could have been treatable if they had the money for the right treatment, and her father had disappeared when she was 8, leaving only fragmented memories of a man who smelled of cigarettes and empty promises. Her ex-husband was somewhere in Florida with a new girlfriend, sending $50 a month when he remembered, which happened maybe 4 times a year. True friends were a luxury that had disappeared along with the marriage, because when you are drowning in bills and double shifts, there is no energy left to maintain relationships that require more than occasional messages. Elena looked up at the gray October sky, heavy clouds promising rain, and for the first time in 4 years allowed herself to question if she could keep swimming against the tide, or if it was finally time to let the current take her wherever it wanted. The side door of the restaurant opened with a metallic creak, and she expected to see a colleague coming to mock her fall, or perhaps the security guard coming to ensure she really left the property. But who appeared was the veteran, limping supported by that makeshift cane, his crystalline eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her straighten up instinctively. He approached slowly, every step looking painful, and without asking permission sat down beside her on the sidewalk with a low groan of protesting joints. For a long moment neither spoke. They just sat there side by side like 2 castaways on a desert island, sharing the heavy silence of those who just survived the same storm. Then he extended a hand, large and calloused, old scars marking the knuckles, and said with that raspy voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't identify, "My name is Vincent Chen, and I owe you much more than an apology." Elena looked at the extended hand, hesitated only a second before shaking it, feeling the surprising strength in that firm and warm grip. "Elena Moretti," she replied, and realized it was the first time in months someone asked to know her name instead of just shouting orders. Vincent studied her with those eyes that seemed to see much more than the surface, and Elena felt strangely exposed, as if he could read every failure and every fear written in the lines around her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, his voice heavy with something between admiration and deep sadness. "You could have stayed invisible, kept your job, your security. Why risk everything for a ragged stranger?" The question hung in the air between them, and Elena realized she didn't have a rational answer, no logical explanation that made sense to an outsider. She thought of all the nights she spent awake after her ex-husband left, staring at the cracked ceiling of the tiny apartment, wondering at what moment her life had become so small, so invisible, so devoid of meaning beyond surviving one more day. She thought of her daughter asking why Mommy always looked so tired, so sad, even when she smiled. "Because I saw my own eyes in yours," Elena finally answered, her voice coming out rawer and more honest than she intended. "I know that hunger, not the stomach kind, but the hunger to be seen as a human being, not as a problem to be discarded." Something changed in Vincent's face, a softening almost imperceptible around the eyes, and he nodded as if she had just confirmed something he suspected but needed to hear. "You are too good for that place, you know that, right? That man, Garrett, he survives by sucking the dignity out of people better than him, because it is the only way he knows to feel powerful. But real power doesn't come from crushing others, it comes from lifting them up. Elena wanted to believe those words, wanted to feel that kindness meant something more than exploited weakness. But the reality was that kindness didn't pay rent, and principles didn't feed children. She looked at her own hands, hard calluses on the palms from holding heavy trays for hours, short nails without polish, because luxuries like manicures belong to another life, another world. Kindness is beautiful in theory, she said with a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. But in practice, it just cost me the only job I've managed to get in 2 years. I have a 7-year-old daughter waiting at home, rent due in 5 days, and now no income. So forgive me if I am not feeling particularly noble right now. Vincent stayed quiet for so long that Elena thought perhaps she had offended him. But when she looked at him, she saw he was looking at the busy street with a distant expression, as if seeing something far beyond the cars and hurried pedestrians. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality, heavier, loaded with old memories that still hurt. I had an empire once, he said, and Elena almost laughed because those words coming out of the mouth of a man wearing a patched military jacket and a broomstick cane seemed completely absurd. But then he continued, built it from scratch, every brick placed with my own hands, every dollar earned with sweat and blood. I had everything money could buy, but in the process, I lost everything that really mattered. I lost my wife because I was always working, always building, always proving my worth to a world that never cared. When she died, I realized I had spent 20 years beside her but barely knew her, because I was too busy being important to people who meant nothing. So I ask myself, Elena Moretti, who is truly rich here? You who risk everything for a stranger, or me who has millions but forgot how to be human? Elena stared at Vincent for a long moment, processing those words that seemed simultaneously impossible and strangely true. Millions, he said. The word hung in the air between them like smoke, insubstantial but impossible to ignore. She looked again at the patched jacket, the broomstick cane, the worn shoes with the sole separating at the side. If you have millions, she said slowly, trying to keep skepticism out of her voice but failing miserably, why are you dressed like this? Why were you begging for water like someone who hasn't eaten in days? Vincent smiled, and it was the first time she saw something other than sadness or seriousness on that wrinkled face. Because I wanted to see who still sees human beings instead of numbers in bank accounts, he answered simply. My son is looking for someone special, and I promised to help him find a person who values character above appearances. You just showed me that those people still exist, even if they are as rare as diamonds and mountains of broken glass. The explanation sounded too absurd to be a lie, but too realistic to be completely true, and Elena found herself trapped in that strange space between hope and disbelief. So this was a test, she said, and couldn't decide if she felt relieved or manipulated. You staged all this, the hunger, the desperation, just to see if someone would be kind? Vincent shook his head with surprising vigor for someone who looked so fragile minutes before. I didn't stage anything. The hunger is real because I haven't eaten since yesterday morning by choice. The desperation is real because I've spent the last 6 months watching my son meet dozens of women who look at him and see only dollar signs, power, access to a world of luxury they would never have alone. He needs someone who sees him as a man, not a walking bank account. And you, Elena Moretti, just proved you still know how to see humanity, where others see only inconvenience. Elena opened her mouth to respond. But before she could form words, a black luxury SUV pulled up in front of them with the silent smoothness of an expensive electric engine. Windows so dark they were practically mirrors reflecting the world back. The back door opened, and Elena saw Italian leather shoes first, then perfectly tailored trousers, followed by a man who looked like he had stepped directly out of a luxury business magazine. He was Asian like Vincent, perhaps in his early 30s, with broad shoulders under a navy blue blazer that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. Perfectly combed black hair, strong jawline, and eyes that were younger and less tired versions of Vincent's, carrying the same sharp intelligence but with less weight of regrets. He moved toward Vincent with obvious urgency, completely ignoring Elena as he knelt beside the older man. Father, what are you doing sitting on the sidewalk? I said to wait in the car after you finished. Vincent made a casual gesture with his hand as if sitting in a dirty alley was the most natural thing in the world. I was having an important conversation, Marcus. This is Elena Moretti, the young woman I told you about on the phone. Marcus finally looked at Elena, and she felt the weight of that evaluating gaze, not cruel like the looks of the restaurant customers, but intense, studying every detail, as if memorizing, or perhaps measuring her value. Marcus stood up in a fluid motion and extended a hand, and Elena noticed that unlike Vincent's calloused hands, these were smooth but firm, hands that held expensive pens and signed million-dollar contracts rather than building empires with physical labor. "Marcus Chen," he said, his voice deep and polite with just a touch of an accent suggesting a bilingual childhood and expensive international schools. "My father told me you lost your job for showing basic kindness to a stranger." Elena shook his hand, very conscious of how her own must feel rough and hard-working in comparison, and nodded because she didn't trust her voice at that moment. The whole situation seemed unreal, as if she had fallen down a rabbit hole and woken up in some strange version of a fairy tale where princes drove SUVs and dirty veterans were undercover billionaires. Marcus exchanged a look with Vincent, some silent communication passing between father and son, and then turned his attention back to Elena. "I would like to discuss a proposal with you, if you are willing to give me a few minutes of your time. Perhaps we can continue this conversation in a more comfortable location than a sidewalk." Elena looked between the two men, Vincent with his encouraging smile and warm eyes, Marcus with his polished but cautious posture, and then looked at the busy street where ordinary people lived. Ordinary lives without mysterious billionaires appearing offering vague proposals. Every survival instinct screamed to be careful, that good things didn't happen for people like her, that there was always a catch hidden in the fine print. But then she remembered the bills due in 5 days, the expression on her daughter's face when she had to explain why they couldn't buy the new sneakers all the other kids had, the sleepless nights calculating if she could stretch pasta with butter for 3 more meals. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, voice firmer than she expected. Marcus smiled, and it was a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them shine in a way that completely transformed his face from intimidating to almost gentle. "I am proposing that you let me correct the injustice my little experiment caused," he said, and then opened the SUV door in a gesture of invitation. "And perhaps, if you are interested, discuss an opportunity that would be beneficial for both of us. But first, I would like to meet the woman my father hasn't stopped praising since he called me 20 minutes ago." The interior of the SUV smelled of new leather and some expensive perfume Elena couldn't identify, but which screamed luxury in a way that made her worn waitress uniform feel even more out of place. The seats were so soft she sank into them as if sitting on clouds, and there were small screens built into the backs of the front seats showing entertainment options in various languages. Vincent entered after her with Marcus's help, and the transformation in his posture was subtle but undeniable, as if the simple act of entering that luxury vehicle had reactivated muscles of authority that had been dormant under the disguise of a tired veteran. Marcus sat next to his father, facing Elena in seats that folded towards each other like in a limousine, and touched a button that made a dark glass partition rise, isolating them completely from the driver Elena hadn't even realized was there. For a moment, silence filled the space, not uncomfortable but charged with expectation, like that pause before a conductor lifts the baton to begin a symphony. Elena forced herself not to shrink in the seat, to keep her spine straight despite every fiber of her being screaming that she didn't belong in that world. Marcus crossed his legs casually but elegantly, and Elena noticed the watch on his wrist, something thin and discreet that probably cost more than she earned in a whole year. "Let me be direct because I imagine you've already had a day too long for games," he began, voice calm but with the underlying authority of someone used to commanding boardrooms full of executives. "My father and I own the Chen Hospitality Group, a chain of luxury hotels and restaurants operating in 43 countries. Le Chateau d'Or is one of our properties, although I admit I don't visit often because I prefer to let local managers handle day-to-day operations." Elena felt her stomach drop as if she had just jumped off a cliff. The owners. She had just lost her job defending the undercover owner in front of the manager, who would likely be fired when they found out. The irony was so absurd she wanted to laugh or cry. She hadn't decided which yet. Vincent must have seen something in her expression because he placed his hand gently over hers, the touch warm and comforting. Breathe, child. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did everything right, which is more than I can say about most people we know. Marcus continued as if he hadn't noticed Elena's existential crisis, or perhaps because he was used to people being shocked when they discovered his true identity. Garrett Blackwood was hired 3 years ago with excellent references and an impressive track record of increasing profits in previous establishments. What we didn't know until today is that he increased profits by cutting costs inhumanely and treating employees as disposable. Elena found her voice, still trembling but present. He makes girls cry over tiny mistakes, fires people without notice for ridiculous reasons, and rules that place with fear instead of respect. We all knew, but no one complained because jobs are hard to find, and he made it clear we were replaceable. Marcus exchanged another look with Vincent, and this time Elena saw genuine anger flashing briefly in those dark eyes before being carefully controlled. "That stops today," Marcus said with a finality that left no room for debate. "Garrett Blackwood will be fired before the end of the day, and I will personally review every employee he fired in the last year to offer rehiring with formal apologies. But that doesn't solve your immediate problem, Elena. You are still without a job because of our social experiment." The phrase "our social experiment" sounded strange, reducing her act of kindness to a variable in a scientific equation, but Elena forced herself to focus on the practical rather than philosophizing about semantics. "So you are offering me my job back," she said, trying not to sound too hopeful, because hope was dangerous when you couldn't afford disappointments. Marcus shook his head slowly, and Elena's heart sank until he continued speaking. "I am offering something better. If you are interested in hearing an unconventional proposal that will sound absolutely insane at first." Elena almost laughed because this whole situation was already insane. So what was one more level of absurdity? "I'm listening," she said, and was surprised to realize she was genuinely curious rather than just desperate. Marcus leaned slightly forward, and for the first time since entering the car, Elena saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes, as if he was about to expose himself in a way he didn't often do. "As my father mentioned, I have met many women recently, all through arranged dates or social events where everyone knows exactly who I am and how much I am worth. Every conversation is performative. Every smile is calculated. Every interest shown in my hobbies or opinions is obviously manufactured to impress me. I'm looking for a partner, not a fan or a fortune hunter. I need to meet someone who sees me as a person first, billionaire second if it even comes to matter. So here is my proposal," Marcus said, and Elena held her breath without realizing it. "I would like to hire you as a consultant for our newly renovated restaurant, with a generous salary and housing provided. In exchange, you would agree to occasional dinners with me, honest conversations where neither of us needs to pretend to be someone we are not, and perhaps if there is any genuine connection, we see where this could naturally lead. No pressure, no expectations beyond mutual honesty. If at the end of 3 months we decide we are just friends, you keep the job and we go our separate ways. If there is something more, we explore it with the authenticity that is missing in my world." Elena stared at him, processing words that sounded simultaneously like a dream opportunity and a giant red flag. "You are basically asking me to fake date you," she said slowly, testing the words. Marcus grimaced, and it was the first unpolished expression she saw on him, making him immediately more human and less intimately perfect. "Not fake. That would be just another performance, and I have enough of that. I am asking for a genuine chance to know someone my father believes has real character, away from pressures and expectations that come with my last name. You would be free to be completely yourself, say no at any time, and leave when you want. I am just asking for honesty, which I discovered to be a commodity rarer than diamonds in my social circle." Elena spent the next 2 weeks living in a strange dream she feared might evaporate at any moment if she blinked too hard. The apartment Marcus provided was 15 times larger than the cramped place she lived before, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's Central Park and a marble bathroom that looked like it came out of a decor magazine. Her daughter Isabella had her own room for the first time in her life, painted lavender with stars that glowed in the dark, and cried with happiness when she saw the new bed with a princess canopy. The job as a consultant was real, surprisingly, involving genuine meetings with chefs and managers on how to improve customer experience without sacrificing staff humanity. Marcus treated her with professional respect during the day, asking for her opinions as if they were truly worth something, taking notes on her suggestions regarding empathy training and employee well-being policies. But it was the dinners that left Elena confused, because they didn't feel like actings or contract obligations, but rather real conversations with someone who genuinely wanted to know her. On the third dinner, at a discreet Japanese restaurant where no one knew them, Marcus opened up about his mother who died when he was 12, leaving Vincent devastated and a boy trying to be an adult too fast. He had assumed responsibilities in the family empire at 16, sacrificing a normal adolescence for boardrooms and financial spreadsheets, and now at 34, looked back and realized he never learned how to be just human instead of a productivity machine. Elena listened, really listened, and then shared about the ex-husband who promised partnership but disappeared when pregnancy turned romantic dreams into real responsibilities. She spoke about working 3 jobs while pregnant, about giving birth alone because there was no one to call, about nights crying in the shower so Isabella wouldn't hear, while calculating how long they could survive with what she had. Marcus offered no empty platitudes or tried to fix her past. He just held her hand across the table and said she was the strongest person he had ever met, and Elena believed he really thought that. On the 5th dinner, Marcus took her to a classical music concert. But in the middle of the symphony, he whispered that he was bored and asked if she wanted to escape for milkshakes at the 24-hour drive-thru near her old house. They sat in the empty parking lot at 2 in the morning, him still in a suit and her in a dress that cost more than 3 months of her old rent, eating fries from a greasy paper bag and laughing at bad jokes neither would remember the next day. It was in that moment, with ketchup on the corner of his mouth and the sound of him laughing without filters or performances, that Elena realized with rising terror that she was starting to feel something real. It wasn't just gratitude for the opportunity or relief for financial security, but something deeper and more dangerous that made her chest tighten when he smiled, and her stomach churn when their fingers touched accidentally. She tried to remind herself that this had an expiration date, that in 2.5 months he would probably realize that suburban waitresses don't mix with Manhattan billionaires, no matter how well they converse about cheap philosophy and empty parking lots. The bomb dropped in the 3rd week. During a business dinner, Marcus insisted she attend as an official company consultant. The private room of the most exclusive restaurant in the city was full of men in suits and some women in designer dresses, all discussing the acquisition of a European hotel chain with vocabulary Elena barely understood. She stayed quiet most of the time, watching Marcus command the room with natural authority, and then one of the executives, impeccably blonde with a perfect manicure and a last name Elena recognized from society magazines, turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And what do you work with exactly, dear?" The way she said dear dripped with condescension disguised as kindness. Elena took a deep breath and answered with honesty because it was the only thing she knew how to do. "I am a customer experience consultant. Previously, I worked as a waitress for 4 years." The silence that followed was deafening, looks being exchanged, eyebrows raised subtly, and then the executive laughed, a crystalline and cruel sound. "How charming that Marcus is valuing a perspective from," she paused theatrically, "customer service straight from the front lines." Marcus tensed beside her, and Elena saw his jaw muscles tighten in a way she recognized as contained anger. But before he could speak, Elena leaned forward, keeping her voice calm but clear. "Yes, from the front lines where I learned that people who treat servers poorly usually treat everyone poorly when they think they can get away with it. I also learned that real empathy doesn't come from an MBA or an important last name. It comes from having been vulnerable enough to recognize humanity in others. So if you find it charming that I value kindness over pedigree, thank you, I take it as a compliment." The silence was different now, charged with shock and something that looked almost like respect from some faces around the table. Marcus placed his hand over hers, a public gesture of solidarity that went unnoticed by no one, and smiled in a way that made her stomach do flips. "My consultant just demonstrated exactly why I hired her," he said to the room, voice cutting like a sharp blade. She understands that the hospitality business isn't about empires or numbers on spreadsheets. It's about making people feel seen and valued. Perhaps we should all spend time waiting tables before sitting in boardrooms deciding the fate of thousands of employees we treat as statistics. The meeting continued, but something had changed, and Elena realized that Marcus wasn't just defending an employee. He was defending someone who mattered to him in a way that transcended professional contracts or 3-month social experiments. That night, after the meeting had ended and all the executives had gone away with their veiled opinions and fake smiles, Marcus took Elena to the restaurant terrace, which was closed to the public. The city stretched out below them like a terrestrial constellation, millions of lights blinking in windows where people lived lives they would never know. The autumn wind was cold, and before Elena could shiver, Marcus had taken off his blazer and placed it over her shoulders. A gesture so natural it seemed rehearsed, but she knew it wasn't. "Thank you," she said softly, "for defending me in there. You didn't have to do that." Marcus turned to her with an expression that was part frustration, part tenderness, completely intense in a way that made her heart race. "Elena," he said, voice husky with emotion he was clearly trying to control, "I need you to understand something. This stopped being a social experiment or professional agreement at least 2 weeks ago. Maybe it never was that for real." The words hovered between them like birds before flight, fragile but full of possibility, and Elena felt the ground beneath her feet become unstable. "Marcus," she began, but didn't know how to finish the sentence because her brain was screaming careful, while her heart sang finally. He took a step closer, not invading her space but definitely closing the distance between two worlds. "When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is if you're going to like the place I chose for dinner that night. When I'm in boring meetings, I catch myself thinking what sarcastic comment you would make if you were there. Isabella showed me her drawings yesterday, and I spent 20 minutes listening to her explain why purple dogs are scientifically superior to brown dogs, and it was the best part of my day." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness Elena had never seen in him before, making him vulnerable and human. "You make me want to be someone better, not richer or more powerful, but more real. And that terrifies me because I don't know how to protect something like that." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall because crying would make it all too real, too vulnerable. "I am a single mother who barely finished community college," she said, voice cracking at the edges. "You command an empire in 43 countries and probably have an MBA from Yale or Harvard. Marcus, we don't make sense on paper. A year from now, you're going to wake up and realize you deserve someone who understands your world, who can stand beside you at a charity gala without feeling like she's wearing someone else's costume." He shook his head with such vehemence that she stopped speaking. "Elena, I've spent my entire life surrounded by people from my world, people with perfect pedigrees and impeccable education and zero real substance. They know all the right words, make all the right moves, and are absolutely empty inside. You are the first person in years who looks at me and sees Marcus, not Chen Hospitality Group. When I talk to you, I don't need to edit every word, calculate every gesture. I can just exist. Do you think I'm going to give that up for someone who looks better on paper but makes me feel invisible in reality?" Before Elena could respond, the terrace door opened and Vincent appeared, limping with a cane she now knew he really needed and wasn't part of a disguise. "Sorry to interrupt," he said with a smile suggesting he wasn't sorry at all. "But I thought you two would like to know that Garrett Blackwood is trying to sue the company for wrongful termination. He claims he was just following standard protocol when he fired Elena, and that we are the ones being biased." Marcus turned so quickly he almost stumbled, and Elena saw the instant transformation from vulnerable man, admitting feelings, to CEO in battle mode. "He is what?" Vincent handed over a tablet showing a lawyer's email that Elena read over Marcus's shoulder. Garrett wasn't just suing. He was making allegations that Marcus was romantically involved with an ex-employee and using a position of power to persecute managers who simply did their jobs. The implications were ugly, suggesting corruption, favoritism, and unethical behavior that could stain the entire company's reputation if the story leaked to the press. Elena felt nausea rising in her throat as she read the accusations, every word carefully chosen to make it look like she was a calculating opportunist who seduced her way to the top, and Marcus was a power predator abusing his position. "He's going to destroy your reputation because of me," she whispered, horror growing in her voice. "Marcus, maybe we should just end this now, publicly, show that there is nothing improper happening." Marcus dropped the tablet on the nearest table with force that made the screen shake. "Absolutely not. I will not let fear of bad publicity or frivolous lawsuits dictate my personal life. Garrett Blackwood is a cowardly bully who is discovering he can't intimidate everyone, and now he's having a tantrum. Vincent, I want our best lawyers on this tomorrow morning. I want every employee he fired or mistreated in the last 3 years interviewed and ready to testify about a pattern of abuse. If he wants war, I'll give him war, but I'll fight with truth while he fights with lies. Let's see who's left standing at the end." Elena looked between father and son, saw the same fierce determination on both faces, and realized Marcus wasn't just defending a company or reputation. He was defending their right to choose each other regardless of what the world thought made sense. And for the first time since it all began, Elena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they really had a chance to survive the storms that were just beginning. The hearing took place 3 weeks later in a conference room that smelled of polished wood and accumulated tension. Garrett Blackwood sat on the other side of the long table with his lawyers, 3 men in gray suits who looked like they came out of the same mold of professional arrogance. He looked different from the man Elena remembered from the restaurant, less a performative tyrant and more a carefully rehearsed victim, with the expression of someone who suffered great injustice and only wanted the truth to prevail. Marcus was next to Elena, so close their shoulders touched and she could feel the tension radiating from him in almost palpable waves. Vincent sat behind them with a tablet showing files of testimonies from 17 ex-employees, each documenting years of systematic abuse Garrett had inflicted while building an empire of fear. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging on a gold chain, opened the session with a professional voice tired from seeing these battles happen hundreds of times before. Garrett was the first to speak, and Elena had to admit he was a good actor when he needed to be. His voice trembled slightly as he told a carefully edited story about how he had dedicated 3 years of his life building Le Chateau d'Or into a prestigious establishment, only to be fired without warning because he dared to maintain professional standards. He painted Elena as an opportunistic woman who saw a chance to seduce her way into a life of luxury, and Marcus as a powerful man blinded by inappropriate attraction to a subordinate. The words were poison wrapped in gift paper of professional concern, and Elena felt nausea growing as she listened to a distorted version of events that transformed her kindness into calculated manipulation. When Garrett finished, he looked directly at her with something that could have been mistaken for pity if you didn't know the cold emptiness behind those eyes. "I am sorry Miss Moretti has been used in this way," he said with fake sincerity that made Elena want to scream. "But I cannot stay quiet while I see a company I helped build be corrupted by favoritism and unethical behavior." Marcus stood up with a movement so controlled it seemed dangerous, like a predator deciding exactly when to strike. His voice when he spoke was cutting ice, every word articulated with surgical precision. "Mr. Blackwood, thank you for this fascinating performance of a wronged man, but now let's deal with facts instead of fiction." He nodded to Vincent, who projected the first document onto the large wall screen. Sarah Mitchell, fired in March of last year because she asked to leave 15 minutes early to pick up a sick son from school. David Torres, fired in June for questioning why you yelled at a new waitress until she cried because she served water with ice when a customer asked for none. Jennifer Park, fired in September for complaining that you called her incompetent in front of customers because she had an accent. Marcus paused, letting the weight of each name sink in. These are just 3 of 17 documented cases in the last 2 years. All of them are here today, ready to testify about your pattern of systematic abuse that increased profits in the short term, but destroyed lives and team morale in the process. The room became so silent Elena could hear the hum of the air conditioning and Garrett's heavy breathing as he tried to maintain composure. "These are just disgruntled employees rewriting history," he said. But the confidence in his voice had cracked slightly. "Any manager who maintains high standards will have dissatisfied ex-employees." Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a gentle expression. "You are right that disgruntled employees are inevitable. But when the pattern is so consistent, When every story describes the same behavior of public humiliation, disproportionate punishment, and creation of a toxic work environment, it stops being about high standards and starts being about abuse of power. He clicked to the next slide showing emails Garrett had sent to staff, messages full of degrading language and veiled threats. These are your own emails, Mr. Blackwood. Your own words documenting exactly who you are when you think no one powerful is watching. Elena saw the exact moment Garrett's mask began to slip, eyes narrowing slightly, jaw tightening. A subtle transformation from performative victim back to cornered predator. Then one by one the ex-employees began to testify. Sarah Mitchell told about her 6-year-old son with asthma, who had an attack at school. About how she begged for just 15 minutes, and Garrett laughed in her face before firing her in front of the whole team as an example. David Torres described a new waitress who was 19 and on her first day of work, trembling and crying after Garrett yelled that she was too stupid to understand simple instructions about water preferences. Jennifer Park, with a strong voice despite trembling hands, recounted how Garrett regularly made comments about her accent, imitating her cruelly to make others laugh, turning every shift into an exercise in humiliation until she finally asked him to stop and was fired an hour later. And as each story unfolded, Elena saw Garrett shrinking gradually, his posture of wronged victim crumbling under the weight of truths that could not be denied or rewritten. His lawyers began to whisper furiously among themselves, and Elena realized they finally understood they had no case, that they had been fed an edited version of events and were now facing a tsunami of evidence destroying every argument they prepared. Marcus looked at Garrett with something between pity and disgust. You built a career on making people feel small because it was the only way to feel big. And when you finally found someone who saw through you, who chose kindness over fear, your first reaction was to destroy her too. But here is the difference between us, Mr. Blackwood. I fight with truth, and you fight with lies. And truth always wins in the end. The mediator removed her glasses and wiped them slowly, a gesture Elena recognized as a way of processing what she had just witnessed. Mr. Blackwood, she said with a voice that had lost all professional neutrality and now carried the weight of moral judgment. In my 20 years mediating labor disputes, I have rarely seen such extensive documentation of systematic abuse. Your claims of wrongful termination not only lack merit but border on frivolous given the clear pattern of problematic behavior you demonstrated. Garrett opened his mouth to protest, but she raised a hand cutting him off. Furthermore, your accusations against Miss Moretti and Mr. Chen appear to be a calculated attempt to divert attention from your own actions by creating a false narrative of impropriety where none exists. I will recommend that this case be dismissed immediately, and I strongly suggest you reconsider continuing with any legal action that will only result in further public exposure of your professional history. Garrett's lawyers began packing up documents quickly, clearly eager to escape the sinking ship they had been foolish enough to board, but Elena wasn't satisfied with just a legal victory. She stood up, and the whole room turned to look at her in surprise because she had remained quiet throughout the hearing. Can I say something? Her voice came out stronger than she expected, carrying 4 years of accumulated anger from being treated as invisible, disposable, less than human. The mediator nodded, and Elena turned to face Garrett directly. You know what the worst part of working for you was? It wasn't the shouting or the public humiliations, although those hurt. It was watching you systematically destroy the light in people's eyes. There was a 20-year-old girl who used to sing while wiping tables, so happy to have gotten her first job, and after 3 months with you, she came to work with eyes red from crying all night because you made her feel stupid and worthless. There was a 50-year-old man who lost his previous job and was desperate to start over, and you mocked him in front of younger customers, making jokes about him being too old and slow. You didn't manage people, you collected victims. Garrett looked at her with pure hatred burning in his eyes, all pretense of civility finally abandoned. And what do you want? An apology? Do you really think you matter enough for me to apologize? Elena shook her head, and for the first time in years felt completely free from the power men like him had exercised over her life. I don't want your apologies because they would be as empty as everything else about you. What I want is for you to understand that you lost. Not just this hearing or your job, but any power you thought you had over people like me. Because while you were busy building an empire of fear, we were building something you never managed to understand, a community of people who care about each other. Sarah, David, Jennifer, and all the others you fired. They found better jobs, places that value their humanity. And me? I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Purpose and people who see me as whole rather than broken. So thank you, Garrett. Thank you for firing me that day because you freed me from a prison I didn't even realize I was living in. Marcus stood up next to her and placed his hand gently on her back, a gesture of support and solidarity. Mr. Blackwood, I have a final proposal for you, he said with a voice that was pure steel wrapped in silk. Withdraw the lawsuit, sign a confidentiality agreement prohibiting you from speaking publicly about this company or anyone associated with it, and in exchange, we will not sue you for defamation, creating a hostile work environment, or various other violations our lawyers are eager to pursue. You leave quietly, keep what remains of your reputation in sectors that don't investigate too deeply, and we all move on. Or you can continue this war, and I guarantee I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure every restaurant, hotel, and hospitality establishment in this country knows exactly what kind of manager you are. Your choice, but you have 30 seconds to decide. Garrett looked between Marcus and Elena, saw the unwavering determination on both faces, and Elena saw the exact moment he realized he had finally encountered people who could not be intimidated or manipulated. His shoulders slumped, defeat finally settling in his bones. I accept, Garrett said with a voice raspy from barely contained anger and humiliation that was likely corroding his insides like acid. I will withdraw the lawsuit and sign whatever your lawyers prepare. But don't think for a second that this means I admit any wrongdoing. I am doing this because I decided you are no longer worth my time. Marcus smiled coldly. Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Whatever helps you sleep at night. But we both know the truth, and that truth will follow you everywhere you go from now on. Reputation is fragile, and yours has just been shattered into thousands of pieces that no amount of rewriting history will put back together. The meeting ended in heavy silence, Garrett and his lawyers leaving quickly like criminals fleeing a crime scene. When the door closed behind them, Elena felt something release in her chest. Tension she had carried for so long it had become part of her physical posture. Marcus pulled her into a hug that was part celebration, part relief, completely sincere. You were incredible, he whispered into her hair, voice loaded with emotion he didn't try to hide. Absolutely incredible. And Elena, for the first time since it all began, allowed herself to cry, not from sadness or fear, but from pure cathartic liberation of finally having won against the kind of person who had spent a lifetime making her feel small. 6 months later, Elena was on the terrace of the apartment she now called home, watching the sunset paint the sky in oranges and pinks that looked unreal in their beauty. Isabella was in her room doing homework, humming some songs she learned at her new school where she had real friends and teachers who cared. The apartment was no longer borrowed or temporary. Marcus had insisted it be hers regardless of what happened between them because security shouldn't be conditional. But what happened between them was something neither of them had planned or could have predicted on the cold sidewalk that day that seemed to have been in another life. They had built something slowly, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, vulnerable moment by vulnerable moment, until one day Elena woke up and realized she was no longer afraid he would leave, because she trusted his choice to stay was as real as hers. The consulting job had turned into a position as director of employee experience for the entire Chen chain, traveling to restaurants and hotels teaching managers that leadership comes from lifting people up, not crushing them. Marcus entered the terrace with 2 cups of tea, a movement so natural and domestic it warmed Elena's heart. He had changed in recent months, become lighter somehow, as if he had finally given himself permission to be human instead of a productivity machine. They sat side by side on the bench he had installed specifically because Elena mentioned once she dreamed of having a place to watch the sunset. I talked to my father today, Marcus said, running a hand through his hair in that nervous gesture Elena had learned to recognize. He wants to officially retire, pass the company completely to me. Elena turned to him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. And what do you want? Marcus smiled, that genuine smile that transformed his intimidating executive face into the man she loved. I want to build something different. Not just an empire of hotels and restaurants, but places where people who work there are treated like family. I want every manager to spend 3 months working as a waiter, cook, maid, to remember that numbers on spreadsheets are real people with real lives. And I want to do this with you by my side, not as an employee or consultant, but as a partner in everything. He slid off the chair and knelt, and Elena felt time stop completely when she saw the small velvet box in his hand. "Elena Moretti," he said, voice trembling slightly with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars but in moments of genuine connection. You taught me that power comes from lifting others, not crushing them. You taught me that I am worthy of being loved for who I am, not for what I possess." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, a solitary diamond on a gold band that was elegant without being ostentatious. "I am not asking you to be my queen in an empire. I am asking you to be my partner in building a life that really matters. Marry me, not for the money or security or opportunity, but because when I wake up next to you, I feel finally at home." Elena felt tears running down her face, but this time they were tears of pure and absolute joy. "Yes," she whispered, and then stronger. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. Not because you are a billionaire or because you can give me security, but because you see me, really see me, and choose to love me anyway." Marcus slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that was a promise and celebration and the beginning of everything they would build together. When they separated, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Isabella appeared at the terrace door with Vincent right behind, both clearly having waited for this moment. "Does this mean Marcus is going to be my official stepdad?" Isabella asked with obvious excitement, and Marcus pulled her into a hug that included the 3 people who had become his chosen family. "It means we're going to be a real family," he said, kissing the top of her head. "If you'll accept me, of course." Isabella pretended to think deeply. "Well, you make very good pancakes and let me choose movies sometimes, so I guess so." Vincent watched everything with eyes shining with unshed tears. And when he looked at Elena, she saw gratitude and paternal love she never expected to find again, after losing her own father so many years ago. "You saved my son from an empty life," he said softly. "You gave him something all the money in the world could never buy, the capacity to love and be loved authentically." That night, after Isabella slept and Vincent returned to his own apartment, Elena and Marcus stayed on the terrace under stars that shone despite the city's light pollution. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" Elena asked, head resting on his shoulder. "From you being kicked out onto the sidewalk to this?" Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Every day. But then I remember that the best things in life never come from easy or planned paths. They come from moments of courage where we choose kindness over security, love over fear, connection over protection. You chose to see humanity in a ragged man when everyone else saw only inconvenience. That choice changed everything." Elena smiled, thinking of the woman she was 6 months ago, exhausted and invisible and convinced her life would always be an endless struggle. "Garrett Blackwood thought he was destroying me when he fired me," she said thoughtfully. "But actually, he freed me to find a life I didn't even know was possible. So maybe we should thank him." Marcus laughed. "Let's not exaggerate, but I can agree that sometimes our worst moments lead us to our best destinations." And while they stood there under the stars, 2 people from completely different worlds who found a way to each other through kindness, courage, and the choice to see beyond surfaces, Elena finally allowed herself to believe that fairy tales could be real, just not in the way storybooks told them. The story of Elena and Marcus teaches us lessons that go far beyond an unlikely romance between a waitress and a billionaire. It shows us that kindness is never a weakness, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Elena risked everything for a stranger who was hungry, not because she expected a reward, but because compassion was part of who she was at a fundamental level. How many times do we let fear of consequences stop us from doing what is right? How many opportunities to change lives, including our own, do we lose because we choose security over humanity? True courage isn't about never having fear, It's about choosing kindness even when fear screams for you to protect yourself first. Elena reminds us that every act of kindness is an investment in the kind of world we want to live in, and sometimes that investment returns in ways we could never imagine. The second lesson is in understanding that your value is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to see yourself. Elena spent years being invisible, treated as disposable by people like Garrett who needed to diminish others to feel big. But she never internalized that cruelty, never let others' abuse define her inner value. When Marcus offered an opportunity, she didn't enter with a grateful victim mentality, but as a woman who knew she had something valuable to offer, perspective and experience, that couldn't be bought with money. You don't need validation from powerful people to have worth. You already have worth, always have, and the right people will recognize that. The wrong people will try to convince you otherwise because your brightness exposes their darkness. The third lesson is about the power of authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. Marcus had everything society says should make someone happy: money, power, success. But he was empty because he was surrounded by people performing rather than connecting. Elena had nothing material to offer, but she had something infinitely more valuable: the capacity to be genuinely herself. She didn't try to transform into a version she thought he wanted, didn't pretend to understand his world or hide her struggles. Her raw honesty created a space where Marcus could finally lower his own masks. In relationships, work, friendships, authenticity is your superpower. People can buy fake appearances anywhere, but real connection with someone genuine is as rare as a true diamond among mountains of glass. The fourth lesson might be the most important. Never let people like Garrett Blackwood steal your humanity. The world is full of petty tyrants who hoard crumbs of power and use them to crush others because it is the only way they know to feel important. You will find bosses like Garrett, colleagues like Garrett, sometimes even family members like Garrett. And when you find them, remember that their cruelty is not about you. It is about the emptiness inside them that no amount of control over others will fill. Don't let them transform you into a bitter and cynical version of yourself. Keep your kindness, but learn to set boundaries. Elena eventually stood up and fought, not with cruelty, but with truth. And truth always wins because lies can be convincing in the short term, but they crumble under scrutiny. Be the person who fights with integrity, not manipulation. And finally, this story teaches us that new beginnings are possible at any age, any circumstance, any starting point. Elena was at one of the lowest points of her life when Marcus appeared. No job, single mother, no support network. She had every reason to feel defeated, to accept that a life of struggle was all she deserved. But when opportunity appeared, even in a strange and unexpected form, she had the courage to grab it with both hands. It is not too late for you. No matter where you are now, what mistakes you made, how many times you fell, each day is a new chance to choose differently. Be different. Build differently. Your story isn't over. This is just a difficult chapter before the turning point happens. Keep choosing kindness, keep being authentic, keep fighting with truth, and trust that the universe has a strange way of rewarding those who refuse to give up their humanity, even when the world tries to rip it from you. So tell me, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much did this story touch your heart? A 0 means you felt nothing, and a 10 means you are reflecting on your own life and choices you need to make. Leave your number in the comments, and if you feel comfortable, share where you are watching from, because I love knowing this community extends from Sao Paulo to Lisbon, from small towns to big metropolises. Maybe you are watching at 3 in the morning because you can't sleep, or on your lunch break stealing 15 minutes of peace. Maybe you are on the bus coming back from a job that doesn't value you, or at home questioning if you have the courage to make a big change. Wherever you are, I want you to know you are not alone. If this story inspired you, hit the subscribe button, because every week I bring stories of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. And if you know someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still matters, that authenticity is power, that new beginnings are always possible, share this story. Because in the end, we aren't here just to consume content. We are here to build a community of people who believe we can be better, do better, live better. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling deeply. And remember, Your story deserves a happy ending too. You just need the courage to keep writing.